Before the story begins, if you love stories about incredible animals saving lives and revealing hidden dangers, don't forget to subscribe to Brave Animals. Every week we bring you real stories of heroes on four legs, stories that will touch your heart and leave you breathless. The warm September sun bathed the small town school in a golden glow. Kids laughed as they marched in the annual parade, their paper flags waving high, costumes bright, parents cheering from the sidewalks. It was the perfect scene of American childhood, safe, carefree, wrapped in a blanket of community. But no, one noticed the German shepherd standing still, ears pricked, staring hard at the man in the clown costume. Thor wasn't just any dog. He was a K9, trained to detect danger, loyal to the bone, and always ready to follow commands. But in that moment, as the band played its happy tunes and the kids waved at the mayor, Thor didn't move. His handler, Officer Mark Rivers, tugged gently on the leash. "Come on, Thor. Let's move with the parade," Mark said, his voice low, calm the way handlers are trained to sound. But Thor wouldn't budge. His dark eyes were locked on the man in the clown suit, an oversized painted smile, a mess of red curls and those gloved hands gripping the wheel of a small cart filled with balloons. Then, without warning, Thor growled, a deep, guttural sound that made Mark's stomach twist. "Thor, heel," Mark ordered, more firmly this time. But Thor didn't listen. The dog lunged, the leash snapped tight as Thor surged forward, barking ferociously, teeth bared, lunging straight for the clown. Parents gasped. Children screamed. The parade came to a halt as Thor leaped onto the cart, knocking balloons into the air, sending candy spilling across the pavement. The man in the clown suit stumbled back, tripping over the curb, his painted smile slipping as fear flashed in his eyes. "Get control of your dog," someone shouted from the crowd. But Mark froze, heart racing, his brain flipping through every protocol, every rule drilled into him at the academy. Thor wasn't a rookie. He was solid, dependable, never reckless. And yet here he was, breaking every rule in the book. The man scrambled to his feet, voice trembling as he said, "It's okay. I'm just here for the kids. It's a parade." But Thor didn't stop. He stood his ground, muscles tense, growling low, his gaze fixed on the man like a laser. Mark yanked hard on the leash. Thor resisted, his body quivering like a loaded spring. What? Was he seeing that no one else could? The clown adjusted his gloves, forcing a nervous smile, glancing around as if looking for an escape. Mark's eyes narrowed. "Sir, stay where you are," Mark ordered, stepping in front of Thor, one hand gripping the dog's harness, the other reaching for his radio. But the man didn't stay. He bolted. For a split second, everything slowed. The kids gasping, the parents screaming, balloons floating, the sun shining down on a scene that should have been innocent but now reeked of something dark. Thor exploded forward, dragging Mark a step before the handler could brace. "Thor, no." But it was too late. The dog was in full pursuit and the man in the clown suit was running, pushing past parents, weaving through the crowd, heading for the street where cars zipped by, honking in confusion. Mark's heart pounded. What was happening? Why was Thor chasing a clown in the middle of a school parade? Across the street, the man tried to disappear between two parked cars, but Thor was faster. The dog lunged, grabbing hold of the man's sleeve, tearing it clean as the man twisted, trying to shake him off. Mark reached them just as the man yelled, "Get your dog off me. He's attacking me for no reason." But Thor wasn't letting go. His teeth sank deeper, holding tight, his tail stiff, his body a wall of muscle. Mark pried Thor off, struggling to get the dog under control. Thor's breathing was ragged, his eyes wild with something Mark had never seen before. "Down, Thor. Heel." Finally, the dog released, panting hard, but his eyes never left the man. The clown's face was pale, his hands shaking as he backed away. "I'm just a volunteer. I'm here for the kids. He's attacking me for no reason." Mark stared at him, noticing something off. The man's gloves were too big. His hands, beneath the makeup, were calloused, rough, the kind you don't get from twisting balloon animals. A small bulge in the man's pocket caught Mark's eye. Before he could say anything, the man turned and bolted again, this time toward a white van parked at the far end of the street. Mark's gut twisted. Thor barked wildly, straining at the leash, and just like that, the van's engine roared to life. It peeled away from the curb, tires screeching, vanishing into the suburban streets as Thor howled in frustration. Mark stood frozen, heart hammering, mind racing. Parents gathered their kids, whispers and panic spreading like wildfire. What just happened? Was Thor really attacking an innocent clown? Or had he just tried to stop something far worse? Mark's radio crackled. Unit 17, report. What's going on down there? Mark swallowed hard, eyes still on the disappearing van. Dispatch, we've got a situation. I think we need to check out that van. And I think Thor just saw something none of us did. Thor sat at Mark's side, breathing heavy, his ears up, his eyes locked on the horizon where the van had disappeared. And in that quiet moment, Mark felt the knot in his stomach tighten into something undeniable. This wasn't over, not even close. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the quiet suburban streets. Mark Rivers sat in his patrol car, the radio static filling the air, his heart still racing. Thor lay in the back seat, his chest rising and falling, with the heavy breaths of a dog who had given his all. But it wasn't over. Not even close. Mark's fingers drummed nervously on the steering wheel. He replayed the scene again and again. The parade, the man in the clown suit, the sudden flight, the white van peeling out like it had been waiting for something. And Thor had gone ballistic, reacting like the man was more than just a performer with balloons. Thor, buddy, Mark muttered, turning in his seat to look at the dog. Thor's eyes were locked on the windshield, focused, alert, like he was still chasing the scent in his mind. Mark's radio crackled to life. Unit 17, did you get a description on that van? Mark lifted the radio, swallowing the lump in his throat. Dispatch, white panel van, no plates visible, possibly a Ford Econoline headed east on Oak Ridge. A pause. Then, copy that. Be advised, no other reports in the area. Could be a false alarm. Mark hesitated. His gut twisted. False alarm? Then why did his dog, his partner, risk everything to stop it? Thor shifted, a low growl rumbling in his throat. Mark reached back, resting a hand on Thor's neck, feeling the tension in his muscles. Easy, boy. We'll figure this out. He couldn't shake the feeling that Thor had seen something none of them had. Something he hadn't. Across town, in a modest two-story house with peeling shutters and a crooked mailbox, a man named Leonard Graves sat alone in a dark living room. The TV flickered, playing cartoons on mute. Leonard's hands trembled as he scrolled through messages on a burner phone, wiping sweat from his forehead. The man in the clown suit, his partner, hadn't checked in. The plan wasn't supposed to go sideways. Not during the parade. Not in broad daylight. Leonard's eyes darted to a duffel bag by the door. Inside, a roll of duct tape, zip ties, a bottle of chloroform, and a list of names. Kids' names. He glanced out the window, the street empty except for a couple of bikes on a neighbor's lawn. The phone buzzed, a single message. Abort, go dark. They're on to us. Leonard cursed under his breath, shoving the phone into his pocket. His eyes lingered on the bag. Tomorrow, he thought. Tomorrow was supposed to be the real job. But now everything was burning down. Back at the station, Mark sat across from the captain, a cup of lukewarm coffee in his hands, the report half finished on his laptop. Let me get this straight, the captain said, leaning back in his chair, the badge on his chest catching the light. Your dog attacked a man in a clown suit, no provocation, no prior incidents, and that man ran. Then a van sped off. And now you want to open an investigation based on… what? Your dog's instincts? Mark clenched his jaw. He wasn't the kind of officer to speak without facts. But something about this didn't sit right. Sir, I know how it sounds. But Thor's never reacted like this before. He's K9 certified. If he's alerting… The captain raised a hand. I get it. I respect your dog's training. But we can't act without evidence. No witnesses, no crime scene. Just a parade, a man in a costume, and a dog acting out of character. We'll keep an eye out, but that's it. Mark opened his mouth to argue, but the words caught in his throat. He looked at Thor, who sat obediently by the door, ears up, eyes sharp. He wasn't just acting out. He was trying to tell them something. Mark closed, his laptop with a sigh, standing to leave. The weight of the badge on his belt felt heavier than usual. Out in the parking lot, Mark opened the back of the SUV for Thor. The dog hopped in, turning to face him like he was waiting for a plan. Mark leaned against the door, staring out at the setting sun. "What are we missing, huh, boy? What the hell are we missing?" Thor let out a short bark, as if to say, "We need to move." As if on cue, Mark's phone buzzed. An incoming tip, anonymous. "Check the old storage yard off Harper Road. Tonight, before it's too late, no caller ID. Just the message." Mark's pulse kicked into overdrive. He glanced at Thor. The dog's tail gave a sharp flick and his ears perked up. Mark slid into the driver's seat, engine roaring to life. "Hang on, buddy. Looks like we're not done yet." The streets were darker now, quiet, the hum of streetlights and the occasional distant siren the only sounds as Mark followed the directions. Harper Road was an industrial strip, mostly warehouses and shipping containers half abandoned, the kind of place you avoided after dark. Thor shifted in the back seat, his body tense, his nose sniffing the air. When Mark pulled into the lot, he killed the headlights and coasted in slow. The van was there, white, parked crooked under a broken streetlight like it had been left in a hurry. Mark's hands tightened on the wheel. Thor let out a low, steady growl. Mark's gut twisted. He reached for the radio, whispering into the mic. "Dispatch, this is Unit 17. I've got a white van at the Harper Road storage yard. No plates. Looks like it could be connected to that incident at the parade. I'm going to check it out." The dispatcher's voice crackled back. "Copy that, Unit 17. Backup is 10 minutes out." 10 minutes. Mark looked at Thor. 10 minutes could be the difference between saving a kid and finding a tragedy. He opened the door. Thor leapt down, ears up, body vibrating with focus. They moved as a unit, silent, methodical, the crunch of gravel underfoot the only sound. As they approached the van, Mark's flashlight caught something, a smear on the side panel. Sticky. Red. His breath caught. "Blood?" Thor's growl deepened. Mark took a step closer, heart pounding in his ears. The van was locked, but Thor circled to the back, nose to the ground, sniffing hard, then barking sharply, pawing at the door. Mark's adrenaline surged. He pounded. On the door. "Police, open up." No answer. He gripped the handle, tested it. Locked. A noise inside. A muffled shuffle. Mark's heart leaped into his throat. Thor barked again, louder, more urgent. Mark backed up a step, eyes narrowing. He had to wait for backup. That was protocol. But Thor was pacing, his body language screaming danger. Now. Mark's mind raced. Was it reckless? Maybe, but waiting could cost lives. He looked at Thor, who met his gaze with a fierce, unblinking stare. Mark nodded once. "Let's do this." He raised his boot and kicked hard, right at the latch. The door burst open. The flashlight beam swept across the van's interior, and what he saw made his blood run cold. The door swung open with a metallic clang, the hinges groaning under the force of Mark's boot. The beam of his flashlight cut through the darkness like a blade, sweeping across the cramped interior of the van. For a breathless second, time seemed to freeze, and then he saw it. In the back corner, wedged between crates and tangled ropes, huddled two small figures. Kids. A boy, maybe 7, and a girl even younger, their faces pale and streaked with dirt, their eyes wide with terror. "Officer, please, help us," the boy whimpered, his voice barely a whisper. Mark's heart twisted, a knot of panic and anger tightening in his chest. He turned toward Thor, who was already lunging forward, nose down, barking furiously at the crates. "Easy, buddy. I see. Them?" Mark muttered, voice low, focused. He reached for his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 17. I've got 2 miners, repeat 2 miners, found in the white van at Harper Road. They're alive. I need EMS and backup now." The radio crackled, the dispatcher's voice urgent. "Copy that, Unit 17, backup en route. ETA 3 minutes. Mark exhaled, forcing himself to stay calm. He approached the kid slowly, keeping his hands visible. "It's okay. You're safe. Now I'm Officer Rivers and this is Thor. We're here to help." The little girl burst into tears, her small body shaking as she clung to the boy. Mark's stomach clenched at the sight. Two kids, snatched from their lives, stuffed into the back of a van like cargo. Thor kept barking, his gaze darting to the front of the van. Mark followed it, and that's when he heard it. A sharp scrape. Movement. Someone was still in the driver's seat. Mark's adrenaline spiked. He drew his weapon, moving in a controlled stance toward the cab. "Police! Show me your hands." No response. He edged closer, flashlight aimed steady. The driver's seat was empty, but the passenger door was swinging open, slow and creaky, as if someone had slipped out in the chaos. Thor lunged past him, barking wildly, nose to the ground, racing toward the shadows between the storage units. "Thor! Go!" Mark bolted after him, heart hammering. His boots pounded against the gravel, flashlight beam bouncing as he ran. A figure darted out from behind a dumpster. Leonard Graves, his face contorted in panic, a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. "Stop! Police!" Mark shouted. But Leonard didn't stop. He sprinted down the alley, breath ragged, feet skidding on the loose gravel. Thor gained ground fast, his body a blur of muscle and purpose. Mark pushed harder, lungs burning, the scent of oil and metal filling the air. He could hear Leonard's ragged breaths, the panic in his footsteps. Thor lunged, teeth bared, catching Leonard's pant leg and yanking him off balance. The man stumbled forward, crashing to the ground, the duffel spilling open. Tape, gloves, plastic restraints, a small vial labeled in a language Mark couldn't read. Mark caught up, leveling his weapon. "Hands behind your head." "Now." Leonard hesitated, breathing hard, then reached into his jacket. "Don't do it," Mark shouted, finger tightening on the trigger. Thor barked, lunging again, teeth snapping just inches from Leonard's arm. Finally, Leonard froze, hands raised. His face was twisted in a snarl, but the fight in him had drained away. Mark moved, fast, cuffing him with practiced efficiency, adrenaline still roaring in his veins. As he secured the cuffs, he couldn't stop the words from spilling out. "What the hell were you planning?" Leonard didn't answer. He just smiled, a slow, creepy curl of his lips that sent a chill down Mark's spine. "You're too late," Leonard whispered. Mark's stomach dropped. Too late? Thor stood guard, growling low, his eyes locked on Leonard like he was waiting for a signal to pounce again. Mark dragged Leonard to his feet, reading him his rights, his voice steady even though his mind was racing. As backup sirens filled the air, Mark turned back to the van. Paramedics were already tending to the kids, wrapping them in blankets, checking vitals. One officer was snapping photos of the scene, documenting everything. Mark walked over, feeling the weight of the night settle on his shoulders. The little boy reached for him as he passed, voice shaking. "Are we safe now?" Mark crouched down, his voice soft but certain. "Yeah, kid, you're safe. You're going home tonight." The boy's eyes flickered to Thor, who stood tall by Mark's side, his tongue lolling but his eyes still sharp. "Is he a police dog?" Mark smiled. "He's not just a police dog. He's a hero." Thor wagged his tail once, like he understood the moment. Later, as Leonard was loaded into the back of a squad car, Mark took a moment to breathe. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by exhaustion and a deep, gnawing unease. Leonard's words echoed in his mind. Too late. What else was out there? Back at the station, Mark sat in the dim glow of his desk lamp, staring at the evidence bag they'd pulled from Leonard's duffel. Inside, a burner phone, a list of names, some with addresses, others just marked with stars. Kids' names. Thor lay at his feet, head on his paws, his breathing calm but alert. Mark glanced down at him, reaching to scratch behind his ears. "You were right, buddy," he whispered. "You were right all along." And in the quiet hum of the night shift, Mark knew one thing for sure. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The station buzzed with a tense energy that clung to the air like humidity on a summer night. Officers moved quickly, voices low but urgent. Mark sat at his desk, staring at the list of names they'd recovered from Leonard's bag. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, but he couldn't type. Not yet. Every name on that list felt like a ticking time bomb. Thor lay at Mark's feet, head resting on his paws. But his eyes were open, watching, waiting. He was always waiting, like he knew there was more. Captain Evans leaned over Mark's shoulder. Anything yet? Mark shook his head slowly. Some names match kids from the parade, but others, we don't have addresses. No connections. The captain's jaw tightened. Damn it, we could be looking at a bigger ring than we thought. Mark nodded, his stomach churning. The thought of how close they'd come to losing those kids made his hands shake. Just then, an officer called from across the room. Rivers, you need to see this. Mark shot to his feet, Thor at his side. The officer held up a phone, Leonard's burner. Tech just pulled location data. He's been to the old Fairview Community Center 4 times this week. Mark's blood ran cold. The Fairview Community Center had been shut down for years, left to rot in a forgotten corner of town. Let's go, Mark said, already moving. The drive across town was quiet, but the tension inside the car could have snapped steel. Thor sat upright in the back seat, eyes alert, tail twitching like a metronome. Mark gripped the wheel, his mind racing through scenarios. Was it a hideout? A stash spot? A place to hold kids until they were moved? By the time they pulled up, the sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the center bathed in the glow of orange streetlights. The building loomed, windows boarded, paint peeling, a chain-link fence sagging around the property. Mark parked a block away, cutting the engine. All right, buddy, he whispered, glancing at Thor in the mirror. Let's see what they didn't want us to find. Thor let out a soft, eager bark. They moved in slow, boots crunching on gravel. The night was still. Too still. Mark's flashlight beam swept over the graffiti-covered walls. The broken sign that read, Fairview Community Center, Esther 1973, the locked front doors. Thor sniffed the air, then darted left, following a scent only he could detect. Mark followed, heart thumping hard in his chest. They circled to the back of the building where a rusted door sat slightly ajar. Thor stopped, ears up, body tense. Mark exhaled, gripping his flashlight tighter. Let's do this. He pushed the door open, the hinges screaming in protest. Drow, inside smelled of mold, old wood, and something else. Something sharp, chemical. Thor growled low, his gaze fixed on the darkness ahead. They moved carefully down a narrow hallway lined with lockers, the floor sticky beneath their boots. Mark's light caught scraps of paper, broken chairs, a child's shoe lying forgotten in the corner. His stomach twisted. Thor sniffed the air, then bolted ahead, barking sharply. Thor! Mark called, rushing after him. The barking led him to a room at the end of the hall, a gymnasium long abandoned, basketball hoops hanging crooked, the floor covered in dust and debris. In the center of the room, under a single hanging light, was a folding table. On it, maps, photographs, and a laptop. And standing there, hunched over the table, was a man Mark had never seen before. Dark hoodie, jeans, a ball cap pulled low. His face hidden. He froze when Thor's bark shattered the silence. Mark raised his weapon. Police! Don't move! The man bolted, sprinting toward a side door. Thor, go! Mark shouted. Thor exploded forward, paws thundering across the floor. Mark chased, heart in his throat. They burst out into an alley, the suspect weaving between dumpsters, knocking over trash cans. Thor was relentless, closing the gap, barking ferociously. Mark's boot slammed the pavement, adrenaline burning hot in his veins. Just as the man reached a chain-link fence, Thor leapt, clamping down on his arm. The man screamed, swinging wildly, trying to shake him off. Mark caught up, tackling the suspect to the ground. Stay down, Mark barked, wrenching the man's arms behind his back. Thor released on command, but he stayed close, growling low. Mark cuffed the man, yanking off his cap to see his face. Late 20s, scruffy beard, eyes darting wildly. Who are you? Mark demanded, breathless. The man sneered, blood trickling from his arm. You're too late, cop. They're already moving the next batch. Mark's gut dropped. Where? The man clamped his mouth shut, glaring with defiance. Mark's radio crackled. Unit 17, status update? Mark grabbed the radio, voice tight. Suspect in custody. We've got a setup here. Maps, photos. This is bigger than we thought. Thor stood watch, tail stiff, ears sharp, as if he knew this was just the tip of the iceberg. Later, back at the station, Mark stared at the evidence table. The laptop, the maps with routes marked in red, the photos of kids with names scrawled underneath, and one photo in particular chilled him to the bone. Lucia, the little girl from the parade. Her picture was marked with a red star. Mark's hands trembled. Thor sat beside him, pressing against his leg. Mark swallowed hard, a single thought echoing through his mind. They weren't done, not even close. The air inside the station felt heavier than usual, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Mark sat hunched. Over the table, a cold cup of coffee in front of him, his hands clenched tight. Thor lay at his feet, tail tapping the floor in short, anxious beats. The evidence board behind them had grown into a web of chaos. Maps, photos of kids, route sketches, and one name circled in bold red, Lucia Perez. Captain Evans stood nearby, arms crossed, his voice low but tense. Mark, we've got the FBI. Looped in now. They're going to handle this. It's out of our hands. Mark looked up, his face pale with exhaustion but burning with determination. With respect, sir, we don't have time for bureaucracy. If they move those kids, they'll vanish. Evans sighed, rubbing his temples. I get it, I do. But we need to follow procedure. Mark slammed his hand on the table, making everyone jump. Thor didn't follow procedure, and he saved those kids. We sit here waiting for the feds, and we'll lose them. Thor barked once, sharp as if agreeing. A beat of silence, then Evans nodded, his voice dropping. All right, Rivers, what do you need? Mark's jaw tightened. He grabbed a marker and circled a warehouse on the map, near the edge of town. This. The Fairview lead wasn't the end of the trail. It's a distribution point. The real handoff is happening tonight at this warehouse by the docks. We've got one chance. Evans hesitated. You're sure about this? Mark locked eyes with him. No, but Thor is. Thor let out a low growl, almost like he could sense the urgency. Mark stood, pulling on his vest, checking his sidearm, and motioned for Thor to follow. The dog jumped up, ready, his body vibrating with energy. Evans muttered under his breath. God, help you, Rivers. Mark didn't wait. The night outside was cold. The city's hum distant as they sped toward the docks. Mark's heart pounded against his ribs, every second ticking by like a drumbeat counting down. Thor sat in the back, ears pricked, nose twitching, like he was tracking something none of them could see. When they reached the warehouse, Mark cut the lights and coasted into the shadows. The building loomed ahead, an old, rusted structure with broken windows and faded lettering that read Sunset Freight Co. A single light flickered near the loading bay, casting long, eerie shadows. Thor let out a soft, urgent whine, pawing at the door. Mark nodded, whispering, Yeah, I know. We're close. He radioed in softly. Unit 17 on site. Possible hostage situation. Moving in. No time for backup. No time for hesitation. Mark drew his weapon, heart hammering in his chest. Thor stayed low at his side, moving with a stealth and precision that came from years of training and something deeper. Instinct. They moved along the side of the building, keeping to the shadows. Mark peeked through a crack in the window. Inside, dimly lit by hanging bulbs, were several kids, maybe 5 or 6, huddled on the floor, their hands zip-tied, eyes wide with terror. A man stood guard, pacing nervously, gun holstered at his hip. Another man, Leonard's contact, was on the phone, voice tense. They'll be here in 20. Get everything ready. The shipment's moving tonight. Mark's breath caught. 20 minutes. That's all they had. He turned to Thor, whispering, Okay, boy. We go in quiet, fast, no mistakes. Thor's tail stiffened, his eyes locked in. Mark took a breath, braced himself, and moved. He kicked the door in with a thunderous crash, weapon raised, shouting, "Police! Hands in the air!" The first man spun, fumbling for his gun, but Thor was already there, launching himself through the air, jaws clamping down on the man's arm. The gun clattered to the floor as Thor dragged the man down, growling deep and low, holding him with an iron grip. Mark rushed in, sweeping the room. The second man shouted and bolted toward the back exit, but Mark was faster. He tackled him into a stack of crates, pinning him hard. "Don't move," Mark barked, voice raw. The kids screamed, tears streaming down their faces, but none of them were hurt. Mark called out, "You're safe now, we've got you, stay down." Thor released the man on command, standing guard over him as Mark cuffed the second suspect. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance. Backup finally on the way. Mark knelt down, in front of the kids, his voice softening. "Are you all okay? Anyone hurt?" A small voice spoke up. Lucia. She was shaking, but her eyes were fierce. "I knew you'd come." Mark felt a lump in his throat. He glanced at Thor, who sat panting, watching the kids like a guardian angel. "You're safe now," Mark said, almost more to himself than to them. As officers flooded the scene, taking over, Mark and Thor stepped back, letting the weight of it all sink in. Lucia broke free from the group and ran to Thor, throwing her arms around his neck, tears soaking into his fur. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Thor leaned into her, tail thumping, gently as if to say, "It's okay, you're safe." Mark stood there, heart racing, breath shaky, watching the scene. He reached down, resting a hand on Thor's head. "You're the real hero, buddy." Thor just closed his eyes, content for the first time all night. But as the adrenaline faded, Mark knew this wasn't the end. The network they'd uncovered was bigger than this. There were more names, more kids, more danger lurking just beyond the next corner. And as long as there were shadows to chase, Mark and Thor would be ready. Together. The early morning sun peeked over the horizon, casting a warm glow over the quiet streets. Mark Rivers sat on the tailgate of his patrol SUV, the cold metal biting through his uniform pants, but he didn't care. His eyes were fixed on Thor, who lay stretched out in the grass, tongue hanging, tail gently thumping. They were both exhausted, physically, emotionally, but alive. And more than that, they had saved lives. Paramedics bustled around the scene, checking over the kids. Parents arrived one by one, their faces etched with terror and relief, sweeping their children into tight embraces. Tears flowed freely, hands trembled, and gasps of gratitude echoed through the air. Mark watched Lucia's mother drop to her knees, wrapping her arms around her daughter, sobbing into her hair. Lucia clung to her mom like she'd never let go, but her eyes drifted to Thor. She broke free just long enough to run over and hug the dog, her small hands burying into his fur. "Thank you," she whispered. Thor licked her cheek, his tail wagging softly. Mark's throat tightened, the weight of the night settling in his chest like a stone. Captain Evans approached quietly, standing beside him with a coffee in hand. "You did good, Rivers," he said, his voice gruff but soft. Mark nodded, swallowing hard. "I didn't do it alone." Evans glanced at Thor, a rare smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "No, you didn't." Mark took a long breath, letting it out slowly. The adrenaline was gone, leaving behind a hollow ache in his bones and a fire in his gut. "This is bigger than we thought, Cap. The list, the warehouse, the network. It's not over." Evans nodded grimly. "No, it's not, but we'll keep digging, and we'll shut it down, piece by piece." Mark stared out at the scene, the kids reunited with their families, the officers packing up, the paramedics loading up their gear. The morning light painted everything in soft gold, but it couldn't erase the shadows. Thor shifted, nudging Mark's leg gently. Mark reached down, resting a hand on the dog's head. "You knew, didn't you, buddy? From the start." Thor's ears twitched, his eyes steady, calm as if he understood every word. Later that day, back at the station, Mark sat in the briefing room, typing up his report. The details poured out like a flood. The parade, the clown, the van, the warehouse, the rescue. Names, times, evidence, arrests. But when he finished, he leaned back and stared at the last line on the page. Sometimes the hardest part of the job isn't following the rules. It's knowing when to trust your gut and your partner. He looked down at Thor, who lay quietly at his feet, tail giving a soft thump every few seconds. "Come on, boy," Mark said, rising from his chair. "Let's take a walk." They stepped out into the fresh air, the world moving on as if nothing had happened. Cars drove by, kids played in front yards, sprinklers clicked on across neatly mowed lawns. Normalcy had returned, but for Mark, it wasn't the same. It never would be. As they walked, Mark thought about the lesson he had learned, how easy it was to get caught up in protocols, checklists, and assumptions. But sometimes, what saves a life isn't written in a manual. It's a bark at the wrong moment. It's a growl that refuses to stop. It's a dog's instinct screaming when your own eyes fail to see. Mark knew Thor wasn't just a canine officer. He was a partner, a guardian, and in many ways the reason they had saved those kids. That night, as Mark sat on his porch with a beer in hand and Thor curled up at his feet, he stared out at the stars and felt a quiet sense of peace. It wasn't over. The case would grow, the investigation would continue, and the work would never truly be finished. But they had made a difference. They had stopped something terrible, even if just for a moment. And that was enough for tonight. Mark looked down at Thor and whispered, "Thank you, partner." Thor opened one eye, gave a slow wag of his tail, and drifted back to sleep. Sometimes it's not the loudest bark or the fastest car that saves the day. Sometimes it's the quiet persistence of a dog who refuses to give up. So here's the question for you. What would you have done in Mark's place? Would you have trusted the instincts of a dog when everyone else said to stand down? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts.